I'm so excited to tell you about the Kroger OptUp app. OptUp is your virtual assistant for healthier shopping. I've been using OptUp with my grocery shopping, and now I'm more mindful as I make food choices for my family at Kroger. What I love the most is how OptUp tracks my household score automatically based off what I'm purchasing at Kroger. OptUp also makes recommendations for healthier alternatives and nutrition facts of the foods we purchase. OptUp is very easy to use. Download it today in the App Store or Google Play. Welcome to the Produce Moms Podcast, where we believe there is a produce mom in all of us. I'm Lori Taylor, founder and CEO of the Produce Moms. For 10 years, I sold fresh produce to over 300 grocery stores in the U.S. And today, my team and I are fully focused on inspiring people to eat more fruits and vegetables. This show is just one of the ways that we hope to inspire you and your family to eat more produce and live a better life. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, join our community of almost 40,000 in all 50 states and over 30 countries by visiting theproducemoms.com/subscribe. And be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks for being here. Enjoy today's show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Produce Moms Podcast. We have a really special and important guest today. We are speaking with Amy Wolfe. She is the president and CEO of AgSafe. And oh my, as I prepared for today's interview and this episode, and I spent some more time learning about AgSafe, just very inspired, very much looking forward to, hearing more from Amy and asking her some questions about our organization. And probably the best way to just kick off today's episode is to simply read the mission of AgSafe. And AgSafe is an organization that is dedicated to advancing the food and farming industry's commitment to a safe and sustainable workforce and food supply. They do this by providing practical education and resources. So really diving into some very important topics, safe and sustainable workforce and food supply. Man, this is going to be a great episode, you guys. And without further ado, Amy, thank you so much for being today's guest.
Lori, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share with your listeners what our organization is and how we are a critical part of the food that is brought to their table.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really important. So, obviously we shared the mission of AgSafe, but in your words, as the president and CEO, what is AgSafe and how do you define this noble and important organization?
Well, I look at AgSafe as a critical resource that helps farmers in doing what they do best. In this day and age, we find that the combination of regulatory pressure and the demands that our friends at the grocery stores are placing on farmers in terms of ensuring that the food they grow is beyond reproach in terms of being as safe as possible for their consumption, but also this idea that you and I want to feel good about the food that we buy. I don't want to think that the farmer who grew my carrots wasn't doing right by his workers, wasn't taking care of them. And so a lot of times, the act of taking care of people is one that can get pretty complicated. It shouldn't, but it does. And so we want to ensure that farmers know what they need to do and, more importantly, how they can go about doing that.
Right. Yeah. You did say it best. Man, it can get complicated, right? I mean, so, being focused on a safe and sustainable workforce and the food supply, I guess my questions are like, what kind of resources and education topics does that entail? Like, what is AgSafe dedicated to providing? I mean, when we talk about taking care of the workforce, I think any of us who've ever been in an employment situation can identify things like OSHA, healthcare, regardless of where you're working. Those are things that are being talked about in a labor scenario. Obviously, child labor comes top of mind. But what are those deeper things that people might not be thinking about that are a huge part of what you guys are doing at AgSafe?
That's a great question. So definitely, I mean, the perspective that you have and listeners who have ever served in that, that formal employer capacity, we first and foremost want to make sure that farmers, because they are employers, understand at base level, what are all of their legal requirements to do right by their people? And so are you paying them the proper wage? Are you paying them as frequently as you're supposed to? Are you providing them mandatory health insurance? If you're in a state like California, are you providing their paid sick leave? And then we get into some of what I would consider are more touchy subjects. Are you using chemicals safely if you're using them at all in your operation? And what are you doing to mitigate the potential risk that workers who don't apply chemicals are still protected from them if they should come in contact with them? Are you ensuring that your workforce knows their responsibility when it comes to creating a safe food supply? We spend a lot of time, you and I are parents, so we're comfortable with things like poop. That's just keeping it real. Yeah. But we spend a lot of time talking about personal hygiene and the effects of a worker's personal hygiene on the potential for contamination of our fresh produce out in the field. And so initially, I want to make sure that a farmer has just a general understanding of that landscape when it comes to that basic compliance. And once they've got a general understanding and we've helped them create systems and put in place the right protocol, then we really want to transition to what we consider our best practices. And a lot of times that requires us having a conversation about, quite frankly, who makes up the workforce in agriculture today. It's interesting. The U.S. Department of Education tells us that the average education of a U.S. farm worker is third grade in their native country, and 89% of farm workers speak little to no English. So when you consider that our workforce is struggling from a literacy perspective and a language perspective, if we're going to be impactful in ensuring that these men and women have a true understanding of what they need to do to protect themselves and their fellow coworkers, and they understand what the farmer's obligation and responsibility is to them, then that means we got to meet them at their level. And so we invest a lot of time and energy in creating educational programs that are very hands-on, use a lot of imagery, but also addresses that language barrier, which is why we employ a bicultural staff. And it's important that folks understand there's a big difference between being bilingual and bicultural, because a lot of how you and I show up every day when we come to work is driven by our value system and our cultural norms. And if you don't have an understanding of the culture from where our workforce comes from, you're going to have barriers to getting them to accept and understand how they can go about doing their job more safely.
I love how you just poignantly described that. I majored in Spanish at IU, and I've never actually heard someone who obviously loves language and culture so much that I, majored in it and studied it at the collegiate level. I've actually never heard someone so, just on point describe how there is a difference between being bilingual and bicultural. And there is language and there is culture, and you are spot on with that. And thank you for sharing that, because I've had an awareness of it, but I never had really thought about it, more so because of what I studied at IU and my experiences, in those immersion programs, not so much because I was, thinking about how that impacts our industry.
Absolutely.
Gosh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So
you're welcome.
There's so many different things, you guys, obviously, that this goes a lot deeper than checking the boxes on like an OSHA compliance, obviously.
Definitely.
And meeting the point about meeting the workforce where they're at is also something I never thought about. That's a stunning, just a startling statistic about the education and the language. I hate to even say language barrier when there's organizations like you that are so open-minded and so eagerly meeting folks where they're at and addressing what could be a barrier and turning it into an opportunity. So it's really, important work. I'm obviously excited about this now.
That's great. I love making new fans. We love making new fans.
I've learned so much preparing for this episode. Your website has an entire section dedicated to farm labor contractors. Mm-hmm. I learned about farm labor contractors when I got involved with political action in DC. Now, my political action is focused on child nutrition programming, specifically USDA school meals. Mm-hmm. But as you know, farm labor labor is one of the top agenda items from an agriculture perspective in terms of policy. And that's where I first learned about farm labor contractors, also known as FLCs. Uh-huh. So can you explain to our listeners, FLCs and how AgSafe serves this important group?
Absolutely. So the way I explain it to folks who are not from the agricultural industry is I said, think of a farm labor contractor as a temp agency, like account temps. If your office needs someone on a temporary basis to come in and provide some additional accounting assistance, farm labor contractors serve the same function for farmers. And they have grown in prevalence, I would say, over the last 10 to 15 years, in large part because of the ongoing struggle to find domestic labor and keep that domestic labor, but only needing those folks for a seasonal period. I know your listeners understand we have this window when it comes to producing food where we see this really big increase in need for people during harvest, in particular for our value-added commodities that still need to be harvested by hand. And so FLCs are that temp agency. Their business is people and understanding the nuances of strawberry harvest versus the nuances of mandarin harvest, sweet potato, blueberry, you name it in the value added commodity segment of farming. Farm labor contractors are a mission critical player in ensuring that you have enough people. Those people are there on time. And because of the sensitive nature, because of the perishability of our commodities, that we can get people in, get those crops harvested, and get them to market in a timely fashion to ensure that we're delivering quality product.
Right. So that right there is a great segue into how the work that you guys are doing at AgSafe truly does affect the end consumers, the households, the folks that are listening to today's podcast. Your work affects the fresh produce that they bring into their home, no doubt, and therefore provides, so many households with, the fruits and vegetables we all love.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I say there are two people that can really capture a farmer's attention: the person that writes their check and the government. And at the end of the day, the household has the power. They have the power of the pocketbook. And when I have conversations with my non-farming friends who are moms, and as you and I know, Lori, moms have the grocery shopping power. Women have the grocery shopping power. We have really thoughtful conversations around how they want to know, they want assurances that the food that they are feeding their kids is not only nutritious and wholesome and free of the potential issue for creating a foodborne illness, but they also want to know that the people that grew that food did so in a way that was honest and honorable and really lived up to what we have known to be the reputation of farmers for centuries. And so as this landscape has gotten more complicated because of greater frequency of foodborne illness, as the landscape has gotten more challenging because the person who has that power has said, I want to ensure that not only did the farmer take care of the earth, but he took care of his people. And there needs to be someone that helps these guys and gals along. There needs to be someone that can be that assistance to them. Because here's something that I do know without question. I have yet to meet a farmer, a man or a woman who is growing a crop and bringing it to the market. I've yet to meet one of them that says to me, you know what, Amy, I hope my workers get hurt. I hope they get sick. It's the exact opposite. For many, many farm families, those people that work with them are part of their extended family. And the barrier isn't because they don't want their people to go home healthy and whole at the end of every day. The barrier becomes the complexity of regulation, quite frankly, the competing issues in regulation. I know this comes as a shock, but we have laws on the books that actually conflict with one another. And so helping farmers figure out, okay, is it this law or that law that I'm supposed to be paying attention to? And how do I exactly go about doing that? Ultimately, you and I might get help when we're having issues within our businesses or even within our families. I don't do my taxes anymore, quite frankly. That got way too complicated years ago. And so really, that's the kind of resource that we are for farmers, is we want them to have someone they can reach out to and ask for help in a meaningful way. So we're not just checking the boxes, but we're really getting in there, getting in deep and making systemic change that then creates a culture, right? Creates good habits. That's really what it's all about. But the woman who holds the pocketbook, she has the power.
Right. Yeah. So those of you listening today, if you're a consumer of fresh produce, my goodness, yes, you have a voice, you have a purpose, and you have a ton of power when it comes to how this how our entire agriculture community makes decisions and moves forward to serve you better. Yeah. So Amy, I mean, so as you're speaking here about like the regulations and navigating things like conflicting laws, when was it that, like, I guess I got two questions here. So when was AgSafe actually founded and, brought to the table as a resource for farmers? And then secondly, how did you really know there was a need? How were you guys the ones to, like, what spurred you to be that solution?
So the organization actually came to fruition back in 1991. And as you and I know is kind of typically the case, Lori, it was a group of farmers who had seen a piece of legislation here in the great state of California that was attempted a number of times in our state legislature. And that bill created mandatory written safety programs, what we know as an injury and illness prevention program. It's a foundational document that by law here in California, every business, not just farmers, but cities, schools, retailers, grocery stores, all of us have to have a formal written safety program that says, how are we going to take care of our people? How are we going to mitigate safety concerns? That sort of thing. And so that bill had made the rounds for years, for most of the 80s, actually. And so you saw a group of farmers come together in a very, grassroots, traditional way in partnership with our land grant university system, with our cooperative extension program, and said, we are in big trouble here because, number one, at the time, we're over 100,000 farms in California. We don't have big safety departments, HR teams. I mean, we're still relatively small farm families. I know it's hard for folks to imagine that in other parts of the country, but back in the 80s, you were still looking at over 90% of all farms in California were still family owned, and they were still relatively small. And so that created a coalition, and out of that, AgSafe was born. I had the pleasure of coming to the organization just a little under 10 years ago, and at the time, to me, it was just the land of low-hanging fruit. We had the opportunity to serve more people in more places, and do much more hands-on education. And my background is in agricultural policy. I actually did start out as a legislative aide in our state assembly. And so I had the perspective of what the sausage making looked like to bring that first law to fruition, but had practical experience. For me, what I've always loved about AgSafe, and it's in our mission statement, is we're about practical. I say I speak fluent regulation, so I can translate all that legalese into real people speak, break it down. But more importantly, what does it actually mean a farmer should be doing on their farm? Does it mean that they need to do a training for 15 minutes every morning to remind their guys about the importance of drinking water when it's hot outside? Is it making sure everybody's got access to first aid CPR training and know how to respond in an emergency? So for me, I had the benefit of a policy background and really just love that, really boots on the ground every day. How do we get in there and solve problems? And then I've been blessed to have an entire team, all women, I might add, who are first generation Mexican American children of farm workers. They are people who have organizational theory, organizational development background, folks who specialize in how adults learn. Very different than my 4-year-old, right? She's a little sponge. Me, you better beat me over the head with it 10 times before it's going to stick. So just really this cool opportunity over the last 10 years to assemble an amazing team of people who both have that perspective of having, been child labor, quite frankly, back in the 70s and 80s, working with their parents in the fields. And so they know that side of the equation, and having a team of people who have studied the more academic, traditional education side of our issues and getting to that root cause. Because it's interesting, when you think about what we do, what we're really doing is we're asking adults to change their behavior. I'm asking you to do your job a little bit differently. And in doing so, you go home with your fingers and toes, your neighbor goes home with his fingers and toes, and everybody is cared for. So you've got to think about it from like a root cause analysis, that it's not enough to just put a couple pieces of paper in front of people, put a couple posters up. You really need to get into the science of behavior change and behavior theory. And I truly believe, we've grown over 700% in the last 6 years. And I truly believe that 700% growth is because we stopped putting a Band-Aid on things and we started trying to getting to the root cause of why and how people change their behavior.
Well, that's practical right there.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, Amy, I'm, because I really didn't. So just to tell our listeners, I met Amy through a mutual friend, Mary Ann of Nature Ripe, and we met at the Produce Marketing Association's Fresh Summit, which was literally just weeks ago. I mean, it was. It was in October. So
yeah.
And I had heard of AgSafe. Like, I think I follow AgSafe maybe on Twitter, and but I hadn't taken the time to, I'm just like, oh, AgSafe, that's an organization I should be, keeping an eye on. But it's been very surface, my understanding of what you guys do, as well as the immense impact that you have, and the very important work that you're doing to help create that safe, sustainable workforce and food supply that everyone wants, and that our farm laborers and farmers deserve. And so I continue to just you talked about your daughter, the sponge. I almost feel like that right now myself, like listening to you. But you mentioned that you have been with AgSafe for 10 years. Any specific advancements that you had your hand in and helped facilitate already that you'd be comfortable sharing?
Absolutely. So one of the big, for us, it's been a huge milestone, and I have to say it was certainly a team effort. But it was this recognition of the role that our supervisors play in bridging this gap between, so a farmer can say, guys, this is what we need to be doing, and what actually happens with the crews out in our vineyards and our orchards, out in the fields. And so we actually spent some time, and it might sound a little morbid, but we actually spent some time analyzing some data that we got from the federal government. One of the great things about AgSafe is because we're a nonpartisan, non-political organization, we actually work really well with the various agencies that have enforcement oversight. And they've been great partners in giving us data, and as well as sharing with us the things that give them heartburn about how farmers are keeping their workforce safe and taking care of their people. So our friends at OSHA provided us serious injury and fatality data for a 4-year period. And one of the things that we were able to dig into is this recognition and understanding that, whether you call it a foreman or a supervisor, mayordomo if you're in Spanish, but it's that man or woman who is directly responsible for managing the crew when they're out pruning trees, when they're out harvesting grapes. In farming, that person is given a lot of power and a lot of responsibility. But oftentimes that person was put in charge because they are really good at growing table grapes, or they are really good at growing peaches. And unlike some of the opportunities that, Lori, you and I have benefited from organizations like Produce Marketing Association, those men and women don't get professional development. Not in the way that you and I know. How do you become a better manager? How do you become a better motivator? And so we invested over a 2.5-year period developing a professional skills program that was specifically targeted to that audience. And we've had huge success with it. We've had companies who've invested meaningful resources as well as time to give those men and women the knowledge and the skills that they need to do that much better of a job. Because what we found was, in 9 out of 10 instances where we were looking at that serious injury and fatality data, in 9 out of 10 instances, 90% of the time, that supervisor or foreman played a critical role in what transpired for that worker who was hurt or who was killed. And so for us, it's been an opportunity to, we talk about putting a Band-Aid on things versus curing disease. For us, there's an opportunity to get in there and provide these men and women with some really practical, again, my favorite word, practical education, but not in the technical stuff, but in the professional skills. I want to give you a great example because this resonated hugely with me. So my director of education, Angelina Ceja, is brilliant. She's just brilliant. And she is part of my team that is former child labor. Her parents came to this country through the Bracero program. And so, she's really connected culturally, but she's also brilliant when it comes to org theory and org development. And so creating this curriculum is really her baby. And she came to me one day when we were, looking at what makes a great manager. And she said, Amy, empathy. you have professional empathy, and empathy is critical in terms of how you respond when someone isn't doing well at work. She said to me, do you know that empathy doesn't literally translate in Spanish in the way that we mean it in English in a professional context? There is no literal translation. We have an understanding for empathy in the context of family. We have an understanding of empathy in the context of community within the church. She said, but empathy doesn't literally translate into a professional context. And so we had to reverse engineer that, because we knew that empathy is one of the key ingredients that you use as a manager when you're addressing how, a subordinate or how someone who also manages people is doing. And so to me, that was a huge aha moment, that if we want to equip folks with tools to help them be good managers in the field, this goes back to, we had to bring it to a level that was appropriate culturally. And in this case, it included a literal translation challenge. And how do you teach a concept that doesn't have a literal Spanish translation in the way that we meant it?
That's amazing. So yeah, I'd say that's quite the advancement. So really digging deep again, moving mountains that are so meaningful is, kind of the first impression. Those are the best words I've got right now. As I learn more about what AgSafe is and the kind of work that they're doing, they're providing that practical next steps to truly, change a culture, change the way things are done. And obviously have been extremely successful at it and leaving no stone unturned in the journey. So thank you for sharing about, some of the great work that you have done. What about in the future? What's one of the top priorities right now at AgSafe?
So labor, as you shared at the start of the podcast, labor is definitely a top of mind issue, and it's certainly thoughts around immigration certainly commandeered this most recent election, and it's been a topic that's of top of mind for folks within our industry. And so one of our top priorities right now is, how do we support growers around the country who take advantage of our country's guest worker visa program? In the vernacular, it's known as the H-2A visa. Because those folks typically have greater regulatory priorities, because you are bringing in people from other countries. And so they've got greater regulatory enforcement than we see with our domestic workforce. And so, but the challenge is that a lot of those workers come here for a very short period of time. Many harvest windows are extremely short in commodities across the country. And so we want to create technological solutions that assist these farmers in making sure those workers get trained. So we have long been what I would consider a purist. We're still the folks that like to read a print newspaper and read a good hard book. We've also been really committed to in-person education, but we know it's just not practical, particularly for our smaller growers in parts of the country that have a lot of geography distance as a potential barrier. And so we're specifically targeting growers right now who use that guest worker program, and we're in the process of putting together a series of new employee orientation training videos that help not only the workers, but also the farmer in ensuring that these folks who are coming predominantly from Mexico, but we see workers from Central America, and on the East Coast, we see workers coming from Haiti and Jamaica as well, and making sure that they know what they need to do while they're here to stay safe, but also just helping with that awareness of what the laws are in the United States as it pertains to how workers are treated on the farm and what they need to do in terms of their responsibilities as they're coming here as well. So it's twofold. It's those H-2A farmers and making sure that we can put together a digital resource. And it's important to note, we're very mindful of the fact that there are huge parts of this country that are still struggling with high-speed internet connectivity. And so we're making sure that we put together resources that are not only live streaming and take advantage of high-speed internet, but if you're folks who are still struggling even to be wired that way, that we also produce videos on DVD that you can access, and that broadband, that lack of broadband connectivity isn't a barrier for you.
Yeah, we talked extensively about, the lack of broadband in rural America. In episode 29, we had one of the vice presidents from Microsoft on, and it was a fascinating perspective, and sharing some stats about the lack of lack of broadband and the kind of barriers that creates within agriculture. So it's interesting that you bring that up. And any of our subscribers to this podcast, this has been heartwarming. It's been super educational. It makes me want to know, how we can support the work you're doing. It makes me want to kind of dive in and learn more. So please share with our listeners, where they can go to learn more about AgSafe and, what they can do to support the really important work that you guys are doing.
Absolutely. So you can find us online. Our website is AgSafe. That's AG, S as in Sam, A, F as in Frank, E.org. You can also check us out on Facebook and Twitter, AgSafe Online. I Facebook Live once a month and give folks some great nuggets of information. I killed it last week. Not even going to lie, Lori. I crushed it last week with our Facebook Live. Really good info. I was in the zone. As someone who does this for a living, you can appreciate when you're in a really good place. Man, does that one feel good. So I would definitely encourage folks to go check out AgSafe Online on Facebook, because we do provide a lot of really good content. And to me, I mean, I want the women of this country, and the men too, but I'm a feminist. I want the women of this country who have this power of the purse. I want you to be educated. I want you to know more. And so checking out the subject matter expertise that we're providing, that's for the farmer, that's of your benefit as well. If you know the kinds of things that our farmers are paying attention to, I am convinced that shoppers and consumers who have better education, you have the power to influence the direction things go. And so checking out our Facebook page, following us on Twitter, or going to our website. And shamelessly, we are a nonprofit organization. We are a 501c3. And so we do rely on charitable giving as a means for us to help ensure that cost isn't a barrier. We're very blessed that organizations like Nature Ripe provide charitable donations to us so we can help keep the cost of things down. But if consumers feel compelled and are motivated and excited about the work that we're doing, there's a donate now button at the top of our website, or you can connect through Facebook, and we'll always take any resources that folks can provide to us to help us keep doing the good work that we're doing.
Yeah, and one real easy way you guys can help AgSafe is simply by sharing this episode with your friends, telling people to tune in and learn more about this.
Absolutely.
Work. Straight from, hearing it straight from Amy, the president and CEO of the organization is really unique, and no one. Your passion is evident, and your commitment to your work. So I truly cannot thank you enough for what you do. We always tell our guests, and as I decide on who's going to be our guests on the Produce Moms podcast, we always tell folks, hey, we're looking for people that are doing work that matters the most, and that is absolutely true for you and your entire team at AgSafe. And I hope they enjoyed today's episode as well. I really enjoyed hearing your passion and appreciation for the entire team at AgSafe and your remarks today. So, folks, this has been a special episode. I have learned a lot, and like all of our episodes, we throw the mic back to our guest for the closing thoughts, the final word. So, Amy, close us out today. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, Lori, thank you for having me. And at the end of the day, I want consumers to remember farmers are doing everything they can to not only provide you with a safe, abundant food supply, but also to take care of their people at the same time. And so when you find yourself being pulled in a direction to vilify or think ill of the men and women that bring food to our tables, remember that there's an entire organization, AgSafe, that's out there giving them a hand and making sure that they do give you that safe, sustainable food supply and protect their people.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Produce Moms podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a featured guest, just send an email to lori@theproducemoms.com. We know there is a produce mom in you because there's a produce mom in all of us. Join our community on Facebook and all social platforms. Help us change the way America eats. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.